I remember the moment clearly. I was already halfway up the mountain. Not at the beginning, not when everything still felt romantic, but far enough that turning back would have felt like admitting defeat. The air was thinner, my legs were burning, the path behind me had disappeared into fog. And that's when it happened. I stopped. Not because I was tired, but because something felt wrong. The silence wasn't empty. It was watching. No wind, no birds, just this strange, heavy stillness, like the world was holding its breath. I laughed a little to myself. Nervous laugh, the kind you make when your mind starts inventing things. And then I saw it. Not a miracle, not lightning, not a voice from the sky. Something worse. I saw how small everything below me was. The town, the rules, the arguments, the moral drama people were killing each other over. Up here, it all looked ridiculous. And that scared me, because a thought slipped into my mind, quietly, politely, like it didn't want to disturb me. What if everything I was taught to care about doesn't matter up here? That was the moment I understood Zarathustra. Not as a philosopher, not as a prophet, but as a man who climbed too far and saw something he could never unsee. You see, my friend, Zarathustra doesn't begin with answers. It begins with distance. Distance from people. Distance from morality. Distance from the noise that tells you who you're supposed to be. Nietzsche didn't write this book sitting comfortably at a desk. He wrote it like someone who had gone up a mountain and came back changed. And that's the danger. Because once you climb high enough, you stop asking, is this good or evil? You start asking, who decided this? Who benefits from this? And why am I still obeying? Zarathustra spends 10 years alone in the mountains, not because he hates people, but because people were too loud, too certain, too moral, too afraid to stand without approval. And when he finally comes down, he doesn't bring commandments. He brings something far more disturbing: questions. He looks at humans and doesn't say, "You are sinful." He says, "You are unfinished." That's uncomfortable, because unfinished things don't have instructions. They don't have rules. They don't have guarantees. They only have responsibility. Most people don't want freedom. They want safety wearing the mask of goodness. Zarathustra sees that. He sees how people cling to morality the way a drowning man clings to driftwood, not because it's true, but because it keeps them afloat. And here's the part no one tells you. This book is not meant to be read. It's meant to confront you. It asks questions like, what if your values were inherited, not chosen? What if humility was fear pretending to be virtue? What if comfort is the enemy of growth? Shh. Zarathustra doesn't whisper these questions. He throws them at you and walks away. And if you're honest, truly honest, some part of you will feel offended. Because this book doesn't attack bad people. It attacks comfortable people. It attacks the version of you that hides behind, "That's just how things are." My friend, this is not a self-help book. This is a self-unbuilding book. It doesn't tell you how to live. It asks whether the way you're living was ever truly yours. So, before we go any further, before we talk about the Übermensch, before we talk about God, morality, power, or destiny, ask yourself one thing. If everything you believed was taken away, Not violently, but quietly. Who would you be without it? Sit back. Take a breath. You're listening to Wise Alchemy. Let's begin. I had been alone for so long that silence no longer felt empty. Up there, above the villages, above the noise, above the need to explain myself, the days passed without names. Morning didn't announce itself. Night didn't ask permission. Time stopped being something I chased. For 10 years, the mountain was enough. The wind spoke without language. The sun taught without sermons. And the silence was not lonely. It was honest. People think solitude is punishment. They imagine it as exile, sadness, isolation. But my friend, solitude is where masks fall off. Up there, I didn't need to impress anyone, didn't need to be right, didn't need to be understood. I watched my thoughts rise and dissolve. I watched desires weaken. I watched beliefs I once defended crumble quietly, without drama. And something strange happened. The more I stayed alone, the less heavy I felt. Not smarter, not superior, just lighter. As if truths don't arrive by force, they arrive when the noise finally leaves. That's when it happened. One morning, the sun rose in a way that felt different. Not brighter, not warmer, but insistent. As if it was saying, "You have taken enough. Now you must give." And suddenly, the mountain, this sacred distance, no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a responsibility. I realized something uncomfortable. Wisdom that stays silent too long becomes cowardice. Insight that hides forever turns into selfishness. So I stood at the edge. Below me, villages, people, noise, belief, certainty. And I hesitated. Because here's the truth nobody talks about. Leaving solitude is harder than entering it. Up there, truth doesn't argue. Down there, truth gets laughed at, mocked, misunderstood, sometimes punished. I knew what awaited me. People don't want truth. They want comfort that sounds like truth. They don't want to be awakened. They want to be reassured. And I knew this would cost me. But something deeper whispered, if wisdom avoids people, it rots. So I descended. Step by step, the air thickened. Thoughts became louder. Certainty returned to faces I hadn't seen in years. And I felt it. The danger. Not physical danger. Something worse. The danger of being heard and still being ignored. The danger of speaking clearly to people who don't want clarity. My friend, this is the first lesson. Wisdom begins in solitude, but it is tested among people. Up there, truth feels obvious. Down here, truth feels offensive. And as I walked toward the world again, I understood. Most people are not asleep because they are stupid. They are asleep because waking up hurts. And I was about to disturb their dreams. So I took one last look at the mountain, not with nostalgia, with gratitude. Because without isolation, I would have had nothing to say. And without returning, everything I learned would mean nothing. This is where the real danger begins. Not on the mountain, but among people. Before we misunderstand this, let me say this slowly. Nietzsche was not celebrating. He was warning. When Zarathustra says God is dead, he isn't shouting triumph. He's standing over a body and realizing no one knows how it happened. And worse, no one knows what comes next. I remember the moment this line truly hit me. It wasn't in a book. It was in real life. A moment when I realized the rules I had followed blindly no longer made sense, but I was still obeying them. That's what Nietzsche meant. What God is dead actually means. Nietzsche isn't talking about a being in the sky. He's talking about a center. For centuries, God wasn't just religion. God was the source of meaning, the judge of right and wrong, the reason suffering made sense, the anchor of morality. God explained why. And then, slowly, quietly, science grew, reason grew, doubt grew. And one day, humanity woke up still using moral words, but no longer believing the foundation behind them. The house was standing. The pillars were gone. Here's the part most people miss. The danger is not atheism. The danger is inheritance without belief. We kept guilt, shame, moral rules, punishment, ideas of sin, but we removed the reason they existed. That's like following laws after the country has collapsed. Nietzsche saw something terrifying coming. Not chaos immediately, but confusion. People would say, everything is allowed, nothing matters, make your own truth. But they wouldn't know how. Because meaning isn't automatic, it has to be created. And creation is hard. Most people don't want freedom. They want certainty. They want someone else to tell them who they are, what to believe, how to live. God's death didn't free humanity. It abandoned it. Look around. Moral outrage everywhere. No shared agreement on values. Everyone convinced they are right. No one willing to create responsibility. We are living after God, but pretending we're still before Him. My friend, that's why modern life feels hollow. Not because we lost belief, but because we haven't learned how to replace meaning without collapsing. Nietzsche doesn't end this with answers. He ends it with a burden. If God is dead, then we are responsible. For meaning, for values, for direction, and most terrifying of all, for ourselves. That's not freedom. That's weight. When I first heard the word Übermensch, I thought Nietzsche was talking about a superhero, someone stronger, smarter, above everyone else. But my friend, that's the shallow reading. Nietzsche wasn't talking about power over others. He was talking about power over oneself. And that changes everything. Zarathustra says something that sounds almost cruel. Quote, "Man is something that shall be overcome." End quote. At first, that hurts to hear, because we like to believe that being human is the highest point. But Nietzsche looks at humanity and says, no, this is a transition, a bridge, not an ending. Think about it. We are no longer animals, but we are not fully conscious creators either. We are caught in between, driven by instincts we barely understand, ruled by morals we didn't choose, living lives designed by fear, comfort, and approval. The Übermensch is not a different species, it's a different relationship to life. This is where people panic. Beyond good and evil, so no morals? No, Nietzsche is not saying do whatever you want. He's asking something far more uncomfortable. Why do you believe what you believe? Did you choose your values, or were they handed to you? Do you act because it's right, or because you're afraid of being judged? The Übermensch does not obey morality blindly. He creates values consciously. Not from resentment, not from fear, but from strength and honesty. How many of your decisions come from courage, and how many come from avoiding discomfort? Here's the part most people skip. The Übermensch is not comfortable. Nietzsche hated comfort culture. A life built only around safety, pleasure, and routine slowly kills the spirit. Comfort tells you, don't risk, don't stand out, don't question too much, don't change. But becoming who you truly are requires friction, struggle, uncertainty, loneliness. The Ubermensch does not ask, will this make me safe? He asks, will this make me more alive? That question alone can ruin a comfortable life. This is the hardest part, because becoming yourself often means you stop belonging everywhere. You outgrow conversations, you outgrow beliefs, you outgrow identities that once felt safe. The herd values sameness, agreement, predictability. The Ubermensch accepts something painful. To become yourself, you may have to walk alone. Not forever, but long enough to hear your own voice clearly. My friend, how many times have you silenced yourself just to stay accepted? Zarathustra gives one of the most powerful images. Humanity is a rope stretched between the animal and the Ubermensch. Below is the abyss. There is no guarantee you won't fall. But staying where you are is not safer either. To live fully is to risk becoming more than you were yesterday. Not perfect, not finished, just more honest. Nietzsche is not asking you to dominate the world. He's asking you to stop lying to yourself, to stop hiding behind borrowed morals, inherited guilt, comfortable identities. The Ubermensch is not a goal you reach, it's a direction, a refusal to rot quietly. Not everyone wants this path, and that's okay. But if something inside you feels restless, like life is asking more of you, then maybe you were never meant to stay where you are. Speaking of the overhuman, of becoming, of climbing, of risking, Zarathustra pauses. And then he tells the people about someone else, someone far more familiar, someone who doesn't climb mountains because he's already comfortable where he is. He calls him the last man. And this is where the story stops feeling philosophical and starts feeling uncomfortably personal. I imagine Zarathustra standing there, looking at the crowd and saying, "Behold, I show you the last man." Not a villain, not a monster, not a tyrant, just a satisfied human being. And that's what makes him dangerous. The last man doesn't want greatness. He doesn't want risk. He doesn't want struggle. He wants comfort. He wants a warm place, predictable days, small pleasures, no sharp edges, no pain, but also no depth. Notice something? The last man isn't unhappy. That's the trap. The last man says, "We have invented happiness," and the crowd cheers, because happiness in his world means no suffering, no danger, no ambition that could fail, no dreams big enough to break your heart. Everything is smooth. Everything is regulated. Everything is safe. But safety slowly suffocates the soul. If something hurts, he numbs it. If something challenges him, he avoids it. If something demands sacrifice, he mocks it. Why struggle when you can scroll? Why build when you can consume? Why become something more when being fine is good enough? Nietzsche saw this coming, long before social media, long before algorithms, long before dopamine became a business model. He inherits them, repeats them, shares them. He doesn't ask, "What should I become?" He asks, "What will keep me comfortable?" And comfort becomes the highest virtue. Not courage, not truth, not depth. Comfort. That detail matters. He blinks at everything that demands effort. He blinks at suffering. He blinks at greatness. He blinks at tragedy. He blinks at transcendence. Blink. Move on. Forget. Does that sound familiar? The last man still talks about morality, still talks about kindness, still talks about equality. But it's a soft morality. A morality that says, don't offend, Don't disrupt. Don't stand out. Don't make us uncomfortable. Anyone who burns too brightly is called dangerous. Anyone who wants more is called arrogant. Anyone who refuses comfort is called insane. My friend, this is Nietzsche's warning. A society can decay not from violence, but from comfort. Not from tyranny, but from convenience. Not from evil intentions, but small desires. The last man doesn't destroy the world. He lets it slowly go numb. The last man thinks he has won. No more wars of values. No more painful striving. No more existential terror. Just peace. Just pleasure. Just stability. But also, no greatness. No transformation. No becoming. Zarathustra looks at the crowd after describing the last man. And the crowd says, "Give us the last man." They don't want the overhuman. They don't want risk. They don't want the mountain. They want comfort. They want certainty. They want sleep. Nietzsche isn't angry here. He's afraid. Because once a society chooses comfort over becoming, it doesn't collapse dramatically. It just stops growing. And the greatest tragedy? The last man believes this is progress. My friend, ask yourself quietly, where do I choose comfort over growth? Where do I numb instead of confront? Where do I settle for fine instead of becoming something more? Because Nietzsche isn't warning about them. He's warning about a version of us. The last man is not the end of humanity by force. He is the end by satisfaction. This is where Nietzsche stops talking about the world and starts talking about you. Not society, not religion, not morality, you. Because before anyone can become something new, they must pass through 3 inner lives. Nietzsche doesn't call them stages, he calls them metamorphoses. And no, they're not equal. Most people never reach the 3rd. Let me walk you through them slowly. 1. The camel, the one who carries. At first, the spirit becomes a camel. The camel kneels and asks, "What is heavy? Give it to me." This is the phase of duty. You carry expectations, rules, traditions, family pressure, cultural beliefs, moral commands, religious ideas, social roles. You don't question them. You endure them. You say, "This is how things are. This is what a good person does. This is my responsibility." And listen, Nietzsche is not mocking the camel. The camel is necessary. Because discipline is born here. Strength is built here. Endurance is forged here. But the camel lives in the desert, and deserts are lonely. At some point, the camel begins to feel something strange, a quiet exhaustion, not of the body, but of the soul. And then, something breaks. 2. The lion, the one who says no. When the weight becomes unbearable, the spirit transforms into a lion. The lion enters the desert and faces a great dragon. Its name is "Thou shalt." Every scale on its body is a command. Thou shalt obey. Thou shalt conform. Thou shalt be moral. Thou shalt sacrifice. Thou shalt not question. And the lion does something radical. It says no. This is rebellion. This is the phase where people reject religion, reject traditions, reject authority, reject expectations, reject identities forced on them. The lion is freedom. But listen carefully. The lion can only destroy It cannot create. It can say, I will not serve, I refuse, I reject. But it cannot yet say, this is what I stand for. This is why so many people get stuck here. They become permanently angry, permanently cynical, permanently reactive. They mistake rebellion for wisdom. Nietzsche warns us here. A life spent only saying no is still controlled by what it resists. So something else must happen, something quieter. After the lion's roar comes silence. And from that silence, the spirit becomes a child. Not childish, childlike. The child represents innocence, play, creativity, beginning, yes-saying. The child doesn't fight the dragon. It doesn't carry the burden. It creates new values. It says, this is good to me. This is meaningful to me. This is how I choose to live. No resentment, no revenge, no bitterness. Only creation. This is the hardest stage because it requires something terrifying. Responsibility for your own meaning. No God to blame, no society to hide behind, no tradition to obey. Only you. Most people never become the child because freedom scares them more than chains. The child must live without excuses. Most people stay camels forever. Some become lions and stay angry. Very few become children. Why? Because creation requires courage without an enemy, and that is rare. The child lives without resentment, without moral superiority, without borrowed meaning. It lives lightly. Not because life is easy, but because the soul is free. Nietzsche is not describing philosophy. He is describing a psychological journey. You can ask yourself right now, am I carrying beliefs I never chose? Am I rebelling just to feel powerful? Or am I creating something honest? The three metamorphoses are not about becoming better. They are about becoming real. And that, my friend, is far more dangerous. There is a moment, quiet, uncomfortable, when you realize something unsettling. You cannot create anything new without first destroying something old. And this is where most people stop listening, because destruction sounds violent, dangerous, immoral. But Nietzsche wasn't talking about breaking buildings. He was talking about breaking beliefs. We're taught that creators are gentle, that they add without taking away, that progress is polite. But history tells a different story. Every real creator was first a destroyer, not of people, but of values. Zarathustra says it clearly, quote, "You must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes?" That's not poetic exaggeration. That's psychological truth. Think about it. If you're holding on to inherited beliefs about success, morality, identity, meaning, where exactly does the new fit? There's no space. Old values don't politely step aside. They cling. They defend themselves. They tell you, this is how it has always been. Nietzsche saw this clearly. Creation isn't blocked by lack of talent. It's blocked by loyalty to the past. My friend, creators scare people, not because they're loud, but because they expose what others have never questioned. Creators don't attack people. They attack assumptions. And people take that personally. That's why creators are called arrogant, dangerous, immoral, ungrateful. Not because they harm others, but because they refuse to kneel. Notice something? Society praises creativity only after it becomes safe. This is important. Listen closely. Nietzsche is not preaching nihilism. He's not saying burn everything. He's saying destroy what no longer gives life. There's a difference. Destruction driven by resentment is ugly. Destruction driven by vision is necessary. One tears down to feel powerful. The other clears space to build. Zarathustra isn't angry. He's honest. Here's the part no one advertises. When you begin destroying old values, even quietly, internally, you lose something: belonging. You no longer fully fit your family's expectations, your culture's scripts, your generation's comfort. And this loneliness isn't a phase. It's the price. Creators walk ahead of language, ahead of approval, ahead of applause. That's why Zarathustra keeps returning to solitude, not because he hates people, but because crowds can't hear unfinished truth. My friend, let me ask you something gently. What belief in your life feels heavy but familiar? What value do you defend not because it's true, but because it keeps you safe? What part of you is begging to be destroyed so something honest can be born? Creation isn't about becoming special. It's about becoming authentic. And authenticity always costs something. Why most people never become creators? Because it's easier to adjust yourself than to question the structure. Because destruction feels like betrayal of parents, of culture, of identity. Because standing alone feels worse than living unexamined. Nietzsche knew this. That's why Zarathustra doesn't beg people to follow. He warns them. Creation isn't light, it's fire. And fire doesn't ask permission. It burns what cannot come with you. Not everyone is meant for this path. But if this chapter unsettled you, that's not a problem. That's the beginning. My friend, have you noticed something strange? How serious the world wants you to be. Not thoughtful, not wise, but heavy. Heavy with guilt, heavy with responsibility, heavy with rules, heavy with how things are supposed to be. Nietzsche calls this force the spirit of gravity. And no, it's not physics. It's psychological weight. When I read this part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, it felt uncomfortably familiar. The spirit of gravity whispers things like, "Don't dream too big. Be realistic. Who do you think you are? Life is serious. Stop playing." It teaches you that suffering equals depth, that joy is childish, that laughter means ignorance. How did lightness become suspicious? The spirit of gravity loves guilt, because guilt bends the spine. It makes you look down. It makes you doubt joy. It makes you feel unworthy of happiness. Nietzsche saw this clearly. A guilty person is easy to control. A serious person obeys. A heavy soul doesn't dance. And look around. How often are you praised for being joyful? How often are you praised for being obedient, serious, and exhausted? This is one of Nietzsche's sharpest attacks. He says, "I would believe only in a God who could dance, not because dancing is silly, but because lightness requires strength." Anyone can be heavy. Anyone can complain. Anyone can judge. But joy? Joy takes courage. Laughter in a world addicted to seriousness is an act of rebellion. The spirit of gravity hides inside morality. Rules stacked on rules, shame layered over desire, obligation replacing curiosity. You're told, good people sacrifice, good people suppress themselves, good people endure. And slowly, life stops feeling alive and starts feeling like a duty. What kind of goodness requires you to feel dead inside? Nietzsche doesn't ask you to be reckless. He asks you to be light without being shallow, to move through life without dragging chains of inherited guilt, to think without apologizing for curiosity, to laugh without explaining yourself. Joy for Nietzsche is not pleasure, it's defiance. It says, I refuse to live bent over. People distrust joyful thinkers because laughter dissolves authority. You can't scare someone who laughs. You can't guilt someone who dances. You can't control someone who treats life as creation, not punishment. That's why the spirit of gravity hates joy. Joy makes people unpredictable. Zarathustra doesn't preach sadness. He warns against false depth, depth that comes from pain alone, depth that worships suffering, depth that mistakes heaviness for truth. True depth, he suggests, is light enough to move, to change, to grow, to dance. A question for you. My friend, what feels heavy in your life right now that was never truly yours to carry? What guilt did you inherit? What seriousness did you accept without question? And what would happen if you put it down? Not everything meaningful needs to hurt. Not everything true needs to feel heavy. Sometimes the most radical act is choosing lightness in a world that profits from your weight. This chapter is uncomfortable. Most people stop listening right here because Nietzsche touches something we're trained never to question. Pity. We're told pity is kindness, that feeling sorry is virtue, that helping everyone always, no matter what, is moral. But Nietzsche pauses and asks quietly, what if pity doesn't save people? What if it keeps them weak? Nietzsche wasn't against helping. He was against lowering life in the name of goodness. He noticed something disturbing. Pity focuses on weakness. It keeps attention on suffering. It rewards staying broken. When you pity someone, you don't meet them as an equal. You meet them from above. And deep down, they feel it. Have you ever felt small when someone felt sorry for you? That wasn't kindness. That was hierarchy. Nietzsche believed real compassion looks different. Real compassion says, I believe you can grow. Pity says, I expect you to stay as you are. One pushes upward, the other freezes people in place. Think about it. If every time you fall, someone rushes to soften the ground, why would you ever learn to stand? Nietzsche saw pity as comfort that blocks transformation. Not cruel, but dangerous. Nietzsche noticed that people who love pity often love being saviors. Helping becomes identity. Rescuing becomes power. And suddenly, the suffering of others becomes necessary. Because without broken people, the savior has no role. Uncomfortable, right? This is why Nietzsche said, pity multiplies suffering, because it preserves it. Nietzsche's alternative wasn't cruelty. It was hard love, the kind that says, I won't lie to you. I won't carry you forever. I won't protect you from becoming strong. Hard love respects potential. Soft pity protects fragility. One builds humans, the other builds dependence. Why this terrifies us? Because pity feels safe. It makes us feel good without changing anything. It lets us avoid discomfort. It lets us avoid conflict. But Nietzsche's entire philosophy is about this. Growth is uncomfortable. Truth is uncomfortable. Becoming is uncomfortable. Pity avoids all three. Zarathustra doesn't shout here. He almost whispers. He says, I do not wish to be your comfort. I wish to be your challenge. And that is why people feared him. Because he didn't promise relief. He promised elevation. My friend, ask yourself this honestly. Do you want to be saved, or do you want to become? Because Nietzsche believes you cannot have both. And this is where the path narrows. There is something Nietzsche understood that most people avoid admitting. Not everyone is meant to walk with you, and some people only slow you down, not because they are evil, but because they are comfortable where you were trying to leave. Zarathustra didn't reject people out of hatred, he rejected closeness out of honesty. And that difference matters. Friends are not shelters. Most people want friends for warmth, for reassurance, for agreement, for distraction from themselves. Nietzsche saw that and quietly stepped back, because when friendship becomes a shelter, growth stops. A true friend does not make you feel safe. A true friend makes you visible. They reflect you back to yourself, your strength, your weakness, your excuses. And that's uncomfortable. That's why real friendship is rare. Zarathustra speaks again and again about distance, not coldness, not isolation for ego, distance for clarity. You cannot hear your own thoughts when everyone is talking at the same time. You cannot discover who you are while constantly adjusting yourself to fit others. Distance is not rejection. Distance is respect for yourself and for the other person. Because pretending closeness when your paths are different is the real lie. This is the part people misunderstand. Loneliness isn't punishment, it's sharpening. When you are alone long enough, you stop performing, you stop explaining, you stop seeking approval, and slowly you begin to hear something else. Your own voice. Not the borrowed one, not the polite one, not the acceptable one, the real one. That voice cannot grow in crowds. My friend, outgrowing people doesn't mean you became better. It means you became different. And difference scares those who stay the same. They don't hate you, they just don't recognize you anymore. Nietzsche understood this pain deeply. That moment when you realize you can't go back, not because the past was bad, but because it's no longer true. And that realization hurts more than any argument ever could. Zarathustra wanted friends who challenge him, who question him, who resist him. Not followers, not comforters, not yes men. A real friend doesn't lie to keep peace. They risk the relationship to protect the truth. And that's rare, painfully rare. That's why most friendships end the moment growth begins. Here's the danger. Solitude can make you sharp, or it can make you bitter. Nietzsche warns against both extremes. The goal is not isolation forever. The goal is independence first. Only then can friendship become a meeting of equals, not a trade of needs. Only then can closeness be chosen, not begged for. If you feel lonely on your path, it might not mean something is wrong. It might mean you're walking somewhere unfamiliar, and not everyone is meant to follow. Zarathustra didn't promise comfort, he promised becoming. And becoming is a solitary act before it is ever a shared one. Nietzsche's not writing about men versus women here. He's talking about how humans love. And how often we don't love people. We love what they represent. When Zarathustra speaks of love, he's not speaking softly. He's warning. Most people don't fall in love with another human being. They fall in love with an idea, an image, a promise, a feeling that saves them from loneliness. We don't say, "I love you as you are." We say, "I love how you make me feel about myself." That's not love. That's emotional hunger. Nietzsche sees love as a mirror, and most people stare at themselves in it. Here's the brutal truth Nietzsche hints at. Desire wants ownership. Love wants growth. Desire says, "Be mine." Love says, "Become more." But most relationships are built on fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of abandonment. Fear of insignificance. So we hold. We restrict. We demand. We call it care. But deep down, it's control. How many times have you seen love shrink someone instead of expand them? When you build your identity around another person, their freedom feels like betrayal. Their growth feels like distance, Their independence feels like rejection. So love turns into jealousy, resentment, emotional bargaining. And then people say, love hurts. No, dependency hurts. Love didn't wound you. Your expectations did. My friend, one of Nietzsche's harshest insights is this: no person is meant to complete you. That belief turns love into a cage. When you expect someone else to give your life meaning, you place an impossible burden on them. And when they fail, because they will, you blame love. Zarathustra isn't against love. He's against using love as a substitute for self-creation. Love as a test of strength. Nietzsche respected strong love. Love that says, I choose you, but I don't need you to survive. Love that doesn't beg, doesn't cling, doesn't collapse when alone. That kind of love is rare because it requires two whole individuals, not two wounded halves. Most people don't want that. They want comfort, reassurance, a soft place to hide from themselves. But Zarathustra asks, can you love without losing your path? This chapter makes people uncomfortable because it asks, do you love to grow or to be needed? Do you love freedom or familiarity? Do you want a partner or a refuge? Nietzsche isn't attacking love, he's stripping it of lies. He's saying, if love makes you smaller, it is not love. Real love doesn't promise safety, it demands courage. Zarathustra walks on, not rejecting love, but refusing to kneel before it. Because love, like truth, should strengthen, not replace the self. And my friend, if love asks you to abandon your becoming, then it is not love. It is fear wearing a beautiful mask. Most people believe life is about survival. Some say it's about happiness. Others say it's about love, or comfort, or security. Nietzsche looked at all of that and quietly shook his head. He said, life isn't driven by pleasure. Life isn't driven by survival. Life is driven by something deeper. He called it the will to power. Not power over others, power over oneself. Power as expression, power as becoming. Let's slow this down. When people hear power, they imagine domination, control, money, violence, authority. But Nietzsche meant something far more subtle and far more dangerous. Power is the urge to expand, to grow, to express what you are capable of becoming. A tree doesn't grow because it wants to survive. It grows because it must express its form. A child doesn't learn to walk to survive. They walk because something inside them says, I can. Power is not cruelty. Power is overflow. Nietzsche rejected the idea that humans chase pleasure. Think about it. People endure pain for things they believe in. Artists suffer for their work. Athletes destroy their bodies. Explorers risk death. Thinkers isolate themselves. If pleasure was the goal, none of this would make sense. But if expression is the goal, then pain becomes part of the process. My friend, pleasure is a side effect. Power is the drive. Animals survive. Humans become. The will to power is the force that says, I want to create. I want to shape my life. I refuse to remain small. This is why comfort is dangerous. Comfort freezes growth. Safety dulls ambition. Predictability kills intensity. Nietzsche wasn't against happiness. He was against small happiness, the kind that trades potential for peace. A person driven by power is hard to control. They don't obey blindly. They don't need permission. They don't ask for approval. They create their own values. That terrifies systems built on obedience, guilt, conformity, sameness. So society rebrands power as evil. Ambition becomes greed. Confidence becomes arrogance. Strength becomes oppression. But what if those labels exist to keep people manageable? Look closely. The people who move humanity forward are rarely good in the moral sense. They are intense, obsessive, uncomfortable. They don't fit neatly. They are driven by something inside them that refuses to be quiet. That is the will to power in its purest form. Creation, not domination. Expansion, not control. Self-overcoming, not superiority. Nietzsche warned us here. When people fail to express power creatively, they express it destructively. That's when domination appears. That's when cruelty appears. That's when resentment turns violent. True power is inward first. Discipline, vision, responsibility. If you cannot govern yourself, you will try to govern others. My friend, ask yourself honestly, where have you chosen comfort over growth? Where have you muted your intensity to be accepted? Where have you shrunk yourself to stay safe? The will to power doesn't ask you to harm anyone. It asks something far harder. Do not betray what you could become. Because the greatest violence is not domination, it is self-abandonment. This is why Nietzsche didn't promise peace. He promised height. And height always comes with risk. After understanding the will to power, Nietzsche turns towards something uncomfortable. Not tyrants, not kings, not conquerors, but those who claim to speak for everyone. The ones who say, "We are all the same. No one should rise too high. No one should stand apart." At first, it sounds kind, fair, humane. But Nietzsche pauses here and asks something dangerous. Who benefits when everyone is forced to be equal? Nietzsche wasn't against fairness in law. He wasn't defending cruelty. What he attacked was moral equality. The idea that all values, ambitions, strengths, and visions must be flattened into one acceptable shape. Because when equality becomes sacred, excellence becomes suspicious. If someone thinks deeper, they're arrogant. If someone creates differently, they're dangerous. If someone rises higher, they must be put in their place. Equality slowly stops being about justice and becomes about comfort. Most people don't fear oppression. They fear being left behind. So instead of rising, they moralize staying small. Instead of creating, they criticize creators. Instead of climbing, they pull. Nietzsche calls this herd morality, not because people are stupid, but because herds survive by sameness. Anything different threatens stability, and stability feels safe. Nietzsche says many moral movements aren't driven by love of justice, but resentment. Resentment towards talent, strength, beauty, courage, originality. So morality becomes revenge with clean language. You're not better, you're evil. Stand out less. Lower yourself so we feel equal. This is how weakness gains power without ever becoming strong. Think about it. A person who trains relentlessly makes laziness uncomfortable. A thinker who questions deeply makes shallow certainty fragile. A creator who risks everything exposes those who chose safety. So instead of admiration, the herd offers moral judgment. Not because excellence is wrong, but because it reminds others of what they avoided becoming. My friend, Nietzsche wasn't asking us to dominate others. He was warning us about something subtler. A world where no one is allowed to rise, because rising makes others feel small. A world where greatness is called immoral and mediocrity is called virtue. A world where equality becomes a ceiling, not a foundation. When everything must be equal, creativity slows, courage disappears, vision is punished, difference becomes dangerous. And slowly, humanity stops growing. Not because of oppression, but because of comfort. Ask yourself honestly, do you believe in equality because it creates justice, or because it protects you from comparison? Do you celebrate excellence, or secretly hope it fails? Nietzsche doesn't judge you for the answer. He only asks you to see it clearly. My friend, true growth doesn't come from pulling everyone down. It comes from allowing difference, risk, height, depth. Equality should protect dignity, not suffocate greatness. And if that idea makes you uncomfortable, Nietzsche would say, good, something important is happening. This is uncomfortable because it's not about the herd. It's about people who are awake, but not free. Nietzsche calls them the higher humans. Not saints, not heroes, not enlightened beings. Just people who almost made it. And almost, in Nietzsche's world, is the most dangerous place to live. I've met them. Maybe you have too. They read more than others, think deeper than others, question religion, society, morality. They don't fully believe the old stories anymore, but still, they hesitate. They still seek approval, still crave recognition, still fear standing completely alone. They escaped the cave, but keep one foot inside just in case. This hurts because it asks, is intelligence enough? Nietzsche's answer is brutal. No. The higher humans see the lie. They see that old morals are inherited, truth is uncomfortable, comfort is poison, meaning is not given. But seeing is not the same as living. They still carry old guilt, still obey invisible rules, still apologize for their strength, still soften their truth to avoid conflict. They know God is dead, but they still behave like someone is watching. They changed their thoughts, but not their spine. Intelligence can become a new hiding place. You analyze instead of acting. You explain instead of choosing. You understand instead of becoming. The higher human says, I know why society is broken. I know why morality is flawed. I know why people are weak. But then, they do nothing. Because doing would cost them comfort. Doing would cost them belonging. Doing would cost them safety. My friend, wisdom without courage is just decorated fear. Ego, the last prison. This is where many get stuck. The ego loves being above others, smarter, more aware, more critical, more cynical. But Nietzsche warns, if your awakening makes you feel superior, you are still trapped, because now the ego is your new god. You mock the herd, but secretly want their applause. You reject morality, but still want moral approval. You stand above, but never walk alone. The higher human doesn't need chains anymore. They build a golden cage. Nietzsche didn't write for the masses. He wrote for these people. And still, he was disappointed, because most of them stopped here. They loved his ideas, quoted his words, admired his rebellion, but they didn't transform. They wanted Nietzsche's fire without being burned. They wanted freedom without loneliness. They wanted power without responsibility. This is a mirror. Nietzsche doesn't insult the higher humans. He warns them, because they are close, painfully close. So close that turning back feels easier than stepping forward. So let me ask you quietly, are you thinking differently or living differently? Are you questioning values or creating your own? Are you awake or just aware? Because awareness is not the destination. It's the threshold. There's a moment on this path that no one warns you about. You think the danger is the world. You think the danger is society. You think the danger is old gods, old morals, old chains. But then you meet something worse, yourself. Not the version you show people, not the disciplined version, not the better version you're trying to become, but the parts you buried, the thoughts you never admit, the desires you judged, the weakness you pretended you outgrew. Nietzsche called this the shadow, and he knew this is where most people turn back. Your shadow is not darkness, it's unaccepted life. Everything you were told was wrong about you. Everything you learned to hide to survive. Everything you pushed underground to be loved. Anger, ambition, jealousy, desire for power, need for recognition, fear, cruel thoughts, forbidding curiosity. Those didn't disappear. They waited. Nietzsche understood something psychology would confirm a century later. What you deny does not die. It learns to rule you from below. My friend, the more someone insists they are pure, the more dangerous they become. Because denied instincts don't vanish, they leak. As resentment, as judgment, as passive aggression, as self-righteousness, as secret cruelty. Nietzsche wasn't asking you to be immoral, he was asking you to be honest. A person who has faced their shadow knows what they're capable of. A person who hasn't believes they are incapable of evil, and that illusion has destroyed more lives than honesty ever did. Here's the paradox. The more conscious you become, the louder your shadow speaks, because awareness shines light on what you've been running from. This is why many spiritual people collapse, why seekers burn out, why thinkers become bitter. They tried to transcend before they integrated. Nietzsche would say, "You don't overcome yourself by escaping your darkness. You overcome yourself by carrying it without letting it rule." This is not about becoming darker. It's about becoming whole. Strength with compassion, ambition with responsibility, desire with awareness, power with restraint. Not purity, balance. The Ubermensch is not clean. He is integrated. He doesn't pretend he has no shadow. He knows exactly where it is. And because of that, it no longer controls him. This is where many quit the journey, because facing the shadow means admitting you're not as good as you thought, letting go of moral superiority, accepting uncomfortable truths, losing the comfort of innocence. Innocence feels safe, but growth is not safe. It's honest. Nietzsche knew only those willing to face their shadow can create new values. Everyone else borrows old ones and calls it virtue. If you take this seriously, you judge less, you fear yourself less, you react less, you project less. Because nothing inside you is hidden anymore. The shadow loses power the moment it's seen. There is a question Nietzsche asks that doesn't sound dangerous at first. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't argue. It simply waits. And once it lands, it doesn't let you sleep. Imagine this. You're alone. No audience, no gods watching, no future rewards, no second chances. And someone leans close to you and whispers, "What if you had to live this exact life again? Every pain, every joy, every mistake. The same nights, the same regrets, over and over, for eternity. No edits, no skipping chapters, no changing outcomes. How does your body react to that question? Because Nietzsche wasn't asking about time. He was asking about your relationship with your life. Most people hear eternal recurrence and think it's about the universe looping. Nietzsche didn't care about physics here. He cared about honesty. Because if the idea of reliving your life forever feels like a curse, then something is deeply unresolved. Resentment, regret, unlived desires, suppressed truth. Eternal recurrence exposes something brutal. You may be surviving your life, but not affirming it. Are you living in a way you would choose again? Many people endure life. They tolerate it. They distract themselves through it. They numb themselves inside it. But Nietzsche wasn't impressed by endurance. He wanted amor fati, love of fate. Not, I can handle this, but yes, I would choose this again. Even the pain, even the loss, even the mistakes. Because only then are you no longer at war with your own existence. My friend, resentment says, this shouldn't have happened. Eternal recurrence asks, can you say yes anyway? Because it removes our favorite escape routes. We often say, it'll make sense later. I'll be happy one day. This is just a phase. The afterlife will fix it. Nietzsche closes all those doors. No later, no compensation, no cosmic apology. Just this life. Again. What parts of your life do you secretly hope never repeat? That's where the work is. Here's the twist most people miss. Nietzsche wasn't trying to punish you with this idea. He was liberating you. Because if you had to live this exact life again forever, you'd stop living passively. You'd stop postponing courage. You'd stop betraying yourself quietly. You'd stop making choices you secretly despise. Eternal recurrence forces one question above all others. Is this how I would choose to exist? And if the answer is no, then change becomes urgent. Not tomorrow, now. The strongest human for Nietzsche is not the one who avoids suffering. It's the one who can look at suffering and say, yes, this too belongs to my life. Not because pain is good, but because denying it fractures the soul. Eternal recurrence is the opposite of escapism. It says, stop waiting for another life. Stop negotiating with existence. Stop living as if this doesn't count. What if this is the only draft you get? So let me ask you gently, not as a philosopher, but as a fellow human. If tonight a voice whispered to you, you must live this exact life again, would you collapse in despair? Or would something inside you whisper back, yes, I am not finished becoming? Because that answer, not your beliefs, not your words, reveals how deeply you have said yes to life. Eternal recurrence is not about eternity. It's about whether you are present enough to choose your life now.